Imagine a civilization that did not starve. It gorged. It gorged until it went completely mad. 4,000 years ago, nestled in the Jordan Valley, sat a Bronze Age superpower. A city where liquid gold quite literally bubbled from the earth. A landscape so lush, Abraham's nephew looked across the plain and believed he had found Eden itself. Today, that exact same valley is a toxic scar. Ash, salt, and silence define it now. It is the lowest, deadest point on the surface of the earth. So, what happened? Ask the world, and they will name a very specific, very famous sin. They are completely wrong. The true crime of Sodom and Gomorrah is hidden in a single, chilling verse, Ezekiel chapter 16. It was not a sudden moral collapse. It was a cold, calculated system, a society that criminalized compassion. Why did they do this? Because they could. Today, we reconstruct the nightmare, the impossible wealth, and the systemic cruelty. We revisit the final, blinding night. We examine the scorched stones and the most terrifying scene in Genesis. We also look into the mirror, because the story of Sodom is not ancient history. It is a countdown. Before the fire falls, however, you must understand the gold. Without unimaginable wealth, the fall means nothing. Close your eyes and step into the Jordan Valley 4 millennia ago. The air is heavy, damp, and alive. The soil is pitch black and rich with minerals. Underground springs have fed this plain since the dawn of time. Date palms line irrigation channels like emerald pillars. Fields of wheat and barley stretch endlessly in deep green rows. Freshwater pools reflect the sky as birds circle lazily above. This is not the barren wasteland associated with the Dead Sea. This is a garden. Genesis 13:10 records the exact moment Lot first saw it. He lifted his eyes and saw the plain of the Jordan. It was well watered everywhere, like the garden of the Lord. It resembled the lush and fertile delta of Egypt. This was no poetic exaggeration. Modern paleobotanical studies confirm the description. Fossilized pollen reveals extensive cultivation. Cereals, legumes, and orchards flourished endlessly. The land produced yields 3 times greater than neighboring regions. It was a place of supernatural abundance. Ancient traditions even suggest that planting a seed guaranteed a harvest. Lot saw paradise and did not hesitate. He chose it immediately. In doing so, he chose his own doom. The green fields, however, were only a distraction. The true power lay hidden beneath the mud. Genesis 14:10 mentions the slime pits, the bitumen wells of Sodom. These pits shimmered with heat even at dawn. Workers wrapped their hands in thick cloth before handling the substance. The black sludge burned the skin upon contact. Its smell was sharp, chemical, and overwhelming. Yet every bucket was worth a month's worth of grain. Bitumen was the petroleum of the ancient world. Egypt demanded it for mummification. Mesopotamian kings used it to waterproof their ziggurats. Shipbuilders relied on it to seal their vessels. Sodom controlled this resource entirely. They held a monopoly over the earth's black blood. It was an endless source of wealth that others could not replicate. The land offered even more riches. The Dead Sea produced the highest quality salt in antiquity. This salt was considered pure white gold. In a world without refrigeration, salt meant survival. It preserved meat and prevented decay. Entire caravans traveled vast distances to obtain it. Traders exchanged heavy silver for this precious resource. Sodom sat at the throat of the ancient world. The great trade routes connecting Mesopotamia and Egypt passed directly through its gates. Every caravan stopped, and every merchant paid a toll. Sodom effectively taxed and regulated the world. Today, one can look at the remains of Tal el-Hammam. Archaeologists have uncovered 10-meter-high defensive walls. They have found complex fortified gate systems with multiple chambers. Massive storage facilities built for large-scale commerce have also been revealed. This was no humble village. It was an apex predator of commerce, a titan of the Bronze Age. A city with more wealth than it could reasonably use. And that was the poison. When a society has everything without effort, something begins to shift. When resources flow endlessly, the human condition changes. The mind twists under excess. The soul begins to starve. The prophet Ezekiel later performed what can be seen as an autopsy. He examined the collapse of this civilization. He diagnosed a slow and silent internal decay. It was not a violent uprising, but a gradual infection. It began with 3 defining conditions: pride, fullness of bread, and abundance of idleness. These formed the foundation of the collapse. Ezekiel 16:49 identifies these conditions with precision. They are not symbolic, but literal causes. The Hebrew word for pride used here is gaon. It signifies arrogant superiority rather than confidence. It reflects deep contempt in those who never face hardship. Such pride leads to indifference toward suffering. A starving stranger becomes irrelevant. Success is viewed as moral proof rather than circumstance. This is not confidence, but contempt. The next condition was fullness of bread. This did not mean simple sufficiency. It referred to overwhelming excess that reshaped behavior. Excavations at Tal el-Hammam show enormous underground silos. These were carved into bedrock with advanced ventilation. They stored far more grain than the population could consume. When food security is absolute, psychology changes. Waste becomes normalized. Discarding food becomes a display of dominance. Excess turns into ritual behavior. Anthropological studies confirm this pattern. Societies with surplus often engage in performative waste. Destroying resources signals power. It becomes a social statement rather than necessity. The final condition was the abundance of idleness. This proved to be the most dangerous factor. In most ancient societies, survival required constant labor. Life demanded effort from every individual. In Sodom, however, wealth flowed automatically. Bitumen resources created effortless prosperity. This gave rise to a new social class, a class that did not need to work at all. Historical records from Mesopotamia describe similar patterns. Extended idleness leads to moral and behavioral decline. Without purpose, the human mind seeks stimulation. Boredom becomes unbearable. With unlimited time and wealth, extremes become attractive. People seek ways to fill the void. Stimulation replaces meaning. This accelerates societal decay. Ezekiel adds a final and critical observation. He states that they did not strengthen the poor and needy. This is a direct and severe indictment. It implies deliberate neglect despite capability. They possessed the resources to help, yet they chose not to act. This was not ignorance, but intention. Compassion was consciously rejected. In the ancient Near East, hospitality was essential. It functioned as a survival system. Laws like the Code of Hammurabi protected strangers and travelers. Sodom reversed this principle. Compassion became a liability. Wealth display became the only measure of status. Helping others disrupted the social order they had built. Ancient Jewish traditions, preserved in the Midrash, recount the disturbing legal codes of Sodom. They describe a system deliberately designed to torment the weak. If a beggar entered the city, citizens would give him gold coins engraved with their names. Yet this apparent generosity was a calculated trap. A local law forbade anyone from selling bread to the beggar. As a result, he would slowly starve in the streets despite being surrounded by wealth. When he died, the citizens reclaimed their coins. This reflects calculated, cold, and systemic cruelty. The Book of Jubilees reinforces this image. It records their impurity, gluttony, and unnatural behavior. The people of Sodom rejected outsiders. They elevated themselves above all others. The physical structure of Tal el-Hammam reflects this mindset. Archaeologists discovered large houses with inward-facing courtyards. Thick walls separated each property. There was a striking absence of communal spaces. The city was designed for isolation. Its structure intentionally excluded the vulnerable. A society that refuses to protect the weak does not remain neutral. Over time, it becomes actively hostile. Eventually, it begins to prey upon those it once ignored. This leads to the final night described in Genesis. Chapter 19 presents one of the most disturbing scenes in the biblical narrative. It depicts a moment so extreme that divine intervention became inevitable. According to the text, nothing remained worth saving. The sun sets behind the hills. The heat lingers in the stone walls. The marketplace grows quiet as merchants close their stalls. Two strangers enter through the city gate. Lot is seated there, as described in Genesis 19:1. In ancient legal tradition, the gate functioned as a place of judgment and authority. Lot held a position of power within Sodom. Yet his reaction to the strangers reveals the true nature of the city. He does not greet them calmly. Instead, he panics and bows deeply to the ground. He urgently insists that they come to his house. The strangers initially refuse and suggest staying in the public square. Lot presses them with increasing desperation. His behavior reflects fear rather than simple hospitality. He understands the danger of the city's laws. He knows what happens to those left unprotected. He brings them into his home and prepares food. He secures the door behind them. For a brief moment, there is peace. The setting is calm, with lamplight and quiet conversation. It is the final, peaceful hour of the city. Soon after, the atmosphere shifts. There is a knock at the door, followed by more. Voices rise outside. The sound of a growing crowd fills the air. Pressure builds against the walls of the house. Genesis 19:4 provides a chilling detail. It states that all the men of the city surrounded the house. This included both young and old from every part of Sodom. This was not a small or isolated group. It represented the entire male population. Every generation and household was present. The unity of their intent is deeply disturbing. They demand that Lot bring out the strangers. Their stated purpose is to know them. The Hebrew term used implies violent domination. The event reflects a complete moral collapse. He begs the crowd and pleads with them to abandon their wicked intent. In desperation, he offers his own daughters in place of the strangers. This act reflects an unimaginable moral collapse. It shows the distorted judgment of someone shaped by a broken society. Such a decision reveals the psychological damage of prolonged exposure to corruption. Lot is not choosing good over evil, but negotiating between horrors. He is attempting to bargain with something beyond reason. His world has eliminated all moral clarity. The crowd rejects his offer without hesitation. They are not interested in compromise. Their anger shifts toward Lot himself. They see his resistance as betrayal. They shout at him to step aside. They accuse him of acting as a judge despite being a foreigner. They threaten to treat him worse than the strangers. In Sodom, defending the vulnerable makes one an enemy. The crowd surges forward with force. They press against Lot and the door behind him. The structure begins to crack under pressure. The situation escalates toward inevitable violence. At that moment, the strangers intervene. They pull Lot back into the house. The door is shut with urgency. What follows reveals their true nature. They strike the crowd with blindness. Instantly, every man outside loses sight. Darkness consumes them completely. The entire population is affected. This is not partial or symbolic blindness. It is total and immediate. From the youngest to the oldest, all are struck. The event demonstrates overwhelming supernatural power. The city is confronted with undeniable judgment. Yet their reaction is the most disturbing detail. They do not repent or retreat. They do not express fear or remorse. Instead, they continue their pursuit. Genesis 19:11 records that they kept searching for the door. Even in blindness, they persisted. Their desire for violence remained unchanged. Their condition was beyond correction. This moment serves as the final diagnosis of the city. It reveals a society completely consumed by its own corruption. No warning could reach them anymore. No intervention could change their course. The blindness becomes a test they fail entirely. The door they cannot find represents their final opportunity. It is a boundary they can no longer cross. Judgment is now inevitable. The strangers then reveal their purpose to Lot. They instruct him to gather his family. They declare that the city will be destroyed. The outcry against it has reached its limit. Lot runs through the darkened streets. He warns his future sons-in-law of impending destruction. He urges them to leave immediately. His message carries urgency and fear. However, they dismiss his warning. They believe he is joking. Their perception has been shaped by the same corrupted system. They cannot recognize the seriousness of the situation. Even after supernatural events, they remain indifferent. Their mindset prevents them from responding. The warning fails to penetrate their understanding. Their fate is sealed. As morning approaches, the city appears calm. The sky is clear and silent. Despite everything, Lot hesitates to leave. His attachment to the city holds him back. The life he built weighs heavily on him. Wealth, comfort, and familiarity delay his decision. He struggles to abandon it all. His hesitation reflects human attachment to material stability. The strangers take decisive action. They seize Lot and his family by the hand. They physically lead them out of the city. Their intervention ensures survival. This act is described as mercy. Even in judgment, compassion is present. The command given is strict and final. They must flee without looking back. They are told not to stop anywhere in the plain. Their escape must be immediate and complete. The urgency reflects the severity of what is coming. They begin to run. The destruction is imminent and unavoidable. Every moment matters. The past must be left behind entirely. Survival depends on obedience. Yet, in that critical moment, hesitation returns. Attachment resurfaces in a final act. Lot's wife turns back. She throws one glance backward. Why? Maybe she was looking for her house. Maybe she was looking for her wealth. Maybe she loved the system that built her. She freezes. The salt crystallizes around her flesh in a microsecond. She becomes a pillar, fixed forever on the ridge above the valley, a permanent, terrifying monument to the ultimate cost of loving a world God has condemned. Then the sky tears open. Then the Lord rained down burning sulfur on Sodom and Gomorrah from the Lord out of heaven. This was no ordinary fire. The first sign is not a flame, it is a massive pressure drop, a deep subsonic vibration that makes the dogs stop breathing. The birds fall silent mid-flight. Then the atmosphere ignites. Not lightning, something infinitely heavier, something that turns the air itself into a weapon of mass destruction. Modern science has dug into the ashes. In 2021, a team of 21 scientists published a peer-reviewed study in the journal Nature Scientific Reports. They examined the destruction layer at Tal el-Hammam. Their findings are apocalyptic. They found pottery that had been vitrified, heated so fast and so intensely that the clay literally fused into glass. They found mud bricks melted into slag. They found limestone transformed into calcium oxide. That specific chemical reaction requires temperatures exceeding 2,000 degrees Celsius. That is hotter than magma. That is far beyond anything a normal fire, an earthquake, or an ancient military siege could ever produce. The scientific consensus? A cosmic airburst. A massive space rock detonating in the atmosphere directly above the city. The researchers compared it to the 1908 Tunguska event in Siberia, which flattened 80 million trees in seconds. But this was worse. The calculated blast at Tal el-Hammam produced heat and pressure identical to a nuclear detonation. It was instantaneous. It was catastrophic. It was lethal to every single cellular organism within the blast radius. The temperature spikes. The limestone walls of Sodom glow blinding white for a fraction of a second. Then, they vaporize. The bitumen pits, the source of all their immense pride and wealth, ignite instantly. Millions of gallons of ancient petroleum erupt into columns of black fire. The granaries that stored their hoarded food are incinerated into dust. The irrigation channels flash boil into steam. The majestic date palms char into black, skeletal monuments. It takes less than a minute. The blast wave hits the Dead Sea. Superheated brine and salt are violently blasted across the entire valley. The most fertile plain on the face of the earth becomes a toxic wasteland of ash, salt, and burning sulfur. Then, silence. A low, guttural groaning sound echoes across the valley. As the superheated structures cool and collapse into rubble, the air is thick, choking with the chemical stench of burning minerals. Where a Bronze Age superpower stood, there is only a smoking mound of glass and debris. Where thousands of people lived, laughed, traded, and tortured, nothing moves. 20 miles to the west, near Hebron, Abraham stands on a ridge. He looks toward the valley he once offered to his nephew. Genesis 19:28. He looked down toward Sodom and Gomorrah, toward all the land of the plain, and he saw dense smoke rising from the land, like smoke from a furnace. The man who once looked at this valley and saw the Garden of Eden now watches it burn. The ancient Hebrew scroll and the modern scientific laboratory point to the exact same morning, the exact same valley, the exact same fire. There is now the Dead Sea, the lowest point on the surface of the earth, 330 meters below sea level. The salt concentration is so violently extreme that no fish swim, no plants root, no organisms breathe in its heavy waters. The shoreline is a crust of dead white minerals. The air permanently smells of sulfur. This is the scar. 4,000 years later, the earth still remembers what the people chose to forget. Deuteronomy 29:23 preserves the aftermath as a permanent, terrifying warning. The whole land will be a burning waste of salt and sulfur. Nothing planted, nothing sprouting, no vegetation growing on it. It will be like the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. Moses stood before the children of Israel. He pointed a finger at the wasteland. He said, "Look at what happens." Jude 1:7 frames it with the cold language of a courtroom. Sodom and Gomorrah serve as an example of those who suffer the punishment of eternal fire. The Greek word Jude uses is deigma, a specimen, a display case. Sodom was not merely punished, it was preserved. It was fossilized as physical evidence for every single generation that would follow. And Jesus Christ himself reached back to the ashes of Sodom when he described the final chapter of human history. Luke 17:28. It was the same in the days of Lot. People were eating and drinking, buying and selling, planting and building. But the day Lot left Sodom, fire and sulfur rained down from heaven and destroyed them all. It will be just like this on the day the Son of Man is revealed. Total normality, interrupted by total destruction. No warning signs in the stock market, no military threat on the horizon. Markets functioning, construction booming, meals being served. And then, in a single morning, fire. Jesus did not use Sodom as a metaphor. He used it as a preview. Here is what Ezekiel actually said destroyed Sodom. Not the violent mob at Lot's door. That was merely a symptom. The final, bloody eruption of a disease that had been quietly festering for generations. The disease itself was silent. Pride, excess, idleness, and the absolute, calculated refusal to help anyone who could not help them back. And here is the true revelation of the mirror. The people of Sodom did not think they were the villains. When you have that much wealth, your mind plays a trick on you. You start to believe you deserve it. You start to believe your massive prosperity is actual proof of your virtue. You convince yourself God is rewarding you. Sodom had overflowing granaries and empty hearts. They had pits of liquid gold and not a single recorded act of mercy. They had absolutely everything they needed and absolutely nothing they were willing to give. That is not ancient history. That is a diagnosis. You can run that exact same diagnostic test on any society on earth right now, including the one you are sitting in. So I am going to ask you something. I do not want you to answer in the comments. I want you to answer in the quiet of your own mind, right now, honestly. When was the last time your abundance produced generosity? When was the last time your extreme comfort produced compassion? When was the last time you threw food away? You know the answer. It was this week. Maybe it was today. You scraped something off a plate into the bin without a second thought. And somewhere on this earth, right now, a mother is watching her child fall asleep, hungry. She is praying to God that tomorrow will be different. You did not cause her pain, but you did not feel it either. And that distance, the cold, silent distance between her hunger and your waste, that is exactly the distance that existed between the gates of Sodom and the starving stranger standing outside them. You have food in your kitchen right now that ancient kings would weep over. You have access to information, resources, and opportunities that most human beings who have ever lived could not even hallucinate. You have fullness of bread. You have abundance of idleness. What does your abundance produce? There is someone in your life right now who is quietly falling apart. You have seen the signs, the canceled plans, the shorter replies, the dead look in their eyes that screams something is fundamentally wrong, even while their mouth smiles and says they are fine. You noticed, and you kept scrolling. You kept walking. You had things to do. That is not cruelty. You are not a monster. But it is the exact same arithmetic that ran Sodom. I have enough. They do not. And that is not my problem. Sodom did not fall because God was angry about one violent moment on one dark night. Sodom fell because an entire civilization looked at the immense, staggering blessings they had been given and decided those blessings existed for personal consumption alone. They turned inward. They built higher walls. They closed the heavy gates. And they convinced themselves that because they were at peace, they were doing nothing wrong. The fire did not create the emptiness. It revealed it. If you stand on the eastern ridge today and look west across that lifeless, toxic water, you are looking at the exact same landscape Abraham saw the morning after the fire. Dense smoke, like a furnace. 4,000 years later, the scar is still there. The land remembers what the people forgot. Prosperity without purpose is not a blessing. It is a countdown. What does your abundance produce? If that question landed somewhere you were not expecting, I want to hear from you. What is one specific thing you are going to do differently this week? Drop it in the comments. Not a vague promise, a specific action. Because Sodom did not fall from one massive decision. It fell from 1,000 tiny ones. And so do we. I read every single comment. If you know someone who needs to hear this warning, share it with them right now. Subscribe to our channel. We do not just study ancient history. We hold it up as a mirror. I will see you in the next one.